On October 15th, we flew 14 hours from San Francisco to Beijing, population about 22 million, on United Airlines. We had paid for more comfortable seats, and the trip wasn't as bad as I expected. We were met at the airport and driven to our hotel, the Park Plaza Beijing Wangfujing. It's a very nice hotel, and they serve a great breakfast buffet with a large selection of Western and Chinese food. Our first full day was an unguided day. We were still recovering from the flight and decided to walk from our hotel to Tiananmen Square. We passed by some flower displays, all kinds of shopping. We weren't able to enter the square, but since we were going the next day, we wandered along through some shopping areas. There is a huge pedestrian mall near our hotel with all the big name tech and clothing stores. It's the first time I saw a 3D display. The next day, we met our guide, Colin, at our hotel and we drove to the Forbidden City. We guessed that Colin is in his late 30s or early 40s. He grew up in a rural area and told us that in the past, meat was a luxury and only eaten on holidays. Food in general was tight. Electricity was subject to regular blackouts. He said all that has changed now. Meat is plentiful and people eat as much as they want. Electricity is reliable. China is recognized by the United Nations and the World Bank as having lifted about 800 million people out of extreme poverty since 1978. We did a lot of walking and passed a lot of security checkpoints before we got into Tiananmen Square. Pictures just don't capture how large a space this is. There are tons of visitors from all over the world. The Forbidden City is the Imperial Palace complex. It was the center of political power in China for over 500 years. Construction finished in 1420. It's the largest preserved royal palace complex still standing in the world and one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. It has almost 1,000 surviving buildings with nearly 9,000 rooms. In the emperor's time, the punishment for unauthorized entry was immediate execution. Parts of it became open in 1912 when the last emperor abdicated, and it became museum property in 1925 when the former emperor was evicted. The Imperial Garden includes a tea house built at the top of a pile of the limestone rock that was so prized and popular. The rock was found in just a few lakes far from Beijing and were raised from underwater and transported to gardens in other cities. We visited the Temple of Heaven. This is where the emperor, twice a year, would have a ceremony to help with the harvest. In earlier times, there might have been human sacrifices as well as lambs. On day 4, we started our day at the National Museum. This is located in the Forbidden City, but the entrance route didn't take as long. Colin suggested we go downstairs to the ancient China section. The crowd was unbelievable. It was difficult even to see the exhibits because of all the people. I did get to see a cool skeleton. Back out on the street, we were picked up by our driver. There's always traffic in Beijing, and we did sit for a while, making slow progress. We were heading for a dumpling restaurant. We got dumplings, hot and sour soup, and an eggplant noodle dish. It was all delicious, especially the soup. Hutong describes a traditional housing area in Beijing, a courtyard house where buildings surround a central courtyard on all four sides. Hutong is also used to describe the alleyways formed by rows of these houses. We visited the home of a family who had made a nice space on an upper level reached by a spiral staircase in their courtyard. We got to meet our hostess's pets, a grasshopper and a large cricket, and there was also a rabbit and other animals outside. And we heard an amazing story about cricket fighting from her brother. He has a very large cricket, a real prize fighter, he calls Michael Tyson. From there, we walked to the bell and drum towers. In older times, these were used to announce daytime and evening to the population. We climbed the bell tower. The steps were so steep and so many, but I made it. Beautiful views of the city from each side around the bell, which is huge. We walked from there to a shopping area, which was very crowded. Just a normal day, nothing special, but tons of people. We passed all types of food shops, shoe stores, clothing stores. Sarah stopped at a candy store and put some small taffy type candies in a bag. On Sunday, our first stop was the Summer Palace, where the Dragon Queen spent her summers. It's about a 30-minute drive from the hotel. This was a bit more relaxing than the other visits, as the volume of visitors was more like what you'd see at Disney World, as opposed to the gigantic crowds we see elsewhere. The palace is set on a large lake with tributaries. It was all really beautiful. There were some amazing ducks we had never seen before, and a giant marble boat. After lunch, we met our driver and drove to the Lama Temple. This was very impressive, a succession of buildings, each one containing different Buddhas. The very last building had only one Buddha, and it was gigantic, carved from a single trunk sandalwood. It stands 60 feet above ground with another 26 feet underground. It's still a functioning religious site, so no photos are allowed of the Buddhas. From the temple, we walked through an exciting area by a lake. The streets were filled with shops of all kinds. It was less crowded than the last shopping area we had visited, so it was a bit more enjoyable. We got picked up there and drove to Prince Gong's mansion. This had been owned by the most corrupt politician in Chinese history. When he was exposed, they found treasures hidden in his palace equivalent to 10 years of the government budget. On day 6, we met Colin at 9 and we were off to the Great Wall. We arrived at our drop off spot, and the first step was now to get on a bus that took us partway up. Off the bus, it was a hike to the cable car, and we passed by many stalls selling touristy stuff. It was feeling very chilly. Temps were in the 40s, so I thought it would be a good idea to buy a hat and some gloves. Now we were back on the trail, mostly uphill, to get to the cable car. It was a fun, steep ride up to the wall with nice views. We got out, and of course, there were more steps and uphill climbing. Spectacular views and a strange feeling of actually being on the Great Wall. I never thought I'd make this in my lifetime. We continued along, mostly moving down to get different views. Colin said this part of the wall was not as crowded because it was a little harder to get to. Colin visits the wall about twice a week. Wow, no wonder he can go up and down these steps and hills like it's nothing. After lunch, it was back to our hotel, and we had to say our goodbyes to Colin. A bit of a sad moment. We really like him, and we've had such a good time with him. Next up is our trip to Xi'an.